All right, everybody. Here we're going to finish up Groundwork 1 and finally get to an actual rule, an actual law of morality. So where we left off last time was the three propositions, the most important of which, to my mind, is the third one, or rather the second one. Actions don't get their moral worth from the purpose to be achieved, but only from their maxim. He then follows up with, to have a duty is to be required to do X from respect for the law. And the idea is it's respect for the law, not respect for the purpose. And if we look at the breakdown of what a maxim is, we can see what is meant here. The idea is, the claim is that O, the object or goal of your action, is not what makes the maxim good or bad. But nothing else seems like it could be. Right? So the fact that it's a certain type of action won't do it. Because if, for example, pick some action type like paying your taxes, right? If we already knew, right, that certain action types were always right, then, I mean, what would be the need for this rule? We could just do a list. The circumstances won't seem to do it by themselves. Now, I added here for reasons are. You might think, oh, well, it's the reasons why you're pursuing the object or goal that makes it good or bad, makes the maxim good or bad. But that's not really going to work either. The idea here is that the reasons, so what R is doing in the maxim, when you say, I will do X in circumstances C to achieve goal O for reasons R, the idea is you're just explaining why it is you want the object by saying, well, there's something else that the goal here achieves. So, for example, if I tell a lie, right, in a certain set of circumstances in order to make some money, well, the reason I want the money is that there's stuff I want to do with the money, right? That's not obviously going to do it either. And here's what Kant thinks. None of the particular parts of the maxim are going to be what makes your maxim morally right or morally wrong. What's going to do the job is the form of the maxim, and basically whether or not it has the form of law. Right? So what does that mean? Right? So the idea is none of the substance of the maxim will do it, so it must be the form or structure of the maxim. The form or structure of the maxim has to be a law-like form or a law-like structure. And in that case, your maxim is a good one, and if it doesn't have the law-like form or structure, then it's a bad one. All right, so what is it for a maxim to have a law-like form or structure? The answer, Kant thinks, is that is universality. This is the defining feature of laws. And by laws here, he is talking about two kinds of laws. He's going to get into this in the second part of the groundwork. But there are descriptive laws. These are the kinds of laws that sort of science discovers, the laws that govern the world and so describe the way things actually happen. And then there are prescriptive laws. These are laws that don't govern how things actually behave, as in they don't describe the tendencies that we actually observe. They tell us what should happen, right? So something like the law of gravity would be a descriptive law, whereas a moral law is going to be a prescriptive law. So you can have two different kinds of laws. You can have descriptive laws, and you can have prescriptive laws. Well, what Kant thinks is both kinds of laws have the feature of universality. They apply universally. And so a good maxim, a morally good maxim, one that if you're willing that maxim, you have a good will, that kind of maxim will have this feature of universality. And so that's it. That's going to be what separates the good and right maxims from the bad or wrong maxims, is that the maxim has the feature of universality. Well, what does that mean? Right? What does it mean to say that your maxim has universality? It is, on the surface, not universal at all. It's about you, It's about the particular circumstances you're in. Right? It's about some particular object or goal you're after for reasons that are yours. So here's what Kant says. Here's how you know that your personal maxim, which is not universal, it's particular. Here's how you know it's law-like, or it is done from respect for the law. It has to be the case that you're not only willing it for you. It has to be the case that you can will it for everybody, that everybody follow your maxim. So in some particular situation, you have a maxim. In fact, every time you perform an action, you have a maxim. It has to be the case that you can will that everyone follow the same principle, the same maxim that you're about to act on. If you can't do that, then your maxim isn't law-like, and your maxim is morally wrong. Okay, so this brings us to the first formulation of the moral law according to Kant. Here in the text it says, that is, I ought never to act in such a way that I couldn't also will that the maxim on which I act should be a universal law. So what does it mean to say that a law is universal? Well, you just mean that any person who is in the same circumstances as you do the same thing that you do, so that's X, to achieve the same goal, and then maybe for the same reasons that you have. Right? Basically, what you're doing is you're saying you can change the I here, where this might be a little confusing because it's the other capital letter in the sentence, but I here is just meaning what I normally does in English. It's not a variable, or it wasn't a variable originally. The idea is, though, that you can change the I here so that anyone in relevantly similar circumstances as the ones you're in will do the same thing for the same reason to achieve the same goal. And this is not a prediction, right? Because remember, this is a prescriptive law that he's coming up with. It's not predicting that everyone will do the same thing. It just has to be the case that you could, like if it was in your power to make it the case that everyone behaved the way you did, you would. If, on the other hand, when you contemplate other people acting on the same maxim as you do, you find that you can't bring yourself to will to decide that they do that, to choose that they do that, then you know that your maxim is morally wrong. And this test, this universality test, has two components, really two ways that you can fail. Right? There's two ways that your maxim can fail to be a morally good maxim. Two ways of failing a universality test. One way to fail is a failure in conception. This happens when it's the case that if you try to conceive of everyone following your maxim, it's actually impossible to conceive of it, right? If it no longer makes any sense for you to, for everyone to do as you are doing. The most common example of this is the example of this kind of failure, is the example of the lying promise. So Kant says, all right, imagine you're in a situation where if you tell a promise, if you give someone a promise that you don't mean to keep, you will achieve some good end for you. You'll achieve something you want, right? So someone says, here, I'm going to give you this money to hold on to for me. I'm going away for a while, and I trust you to keep it, and when I come back, I want you to give it to me. And don't spend it in between between now and then when I come back. And you say, yes, yes, I will keep this money safe for you. Right? But you don't ever mean to do that. You mean to just take this money and now it's your money. So it's a lying promise. Here's what Kant would say. Imagine everyone does as you do. Right? Try to imagine that everyone tells lying promises. Right? So everyone in the world tells lying promises, that's X, in similar circumstances, in order to achieve the goal of keeping the money, for the reasons of, lots of reasons you might have to have the money. what Kant's going to say is you actually can't conceive of this. Because try to conceive of that world. Try to conceive of a world where everyone, when they're put in a situation to hold on to something for someone, says they'll do it without meaning to do it. Well, in such a world, no one would believe any promises, right? So like if in such a world, if you said, absolutely, I'll take care of this money for you, the person who has the money and who's going away will be like, wait a minute. Everybody, when they say that, always means really that they're not going to do it. They're going to keep the money. So they're not going to give the money to you. Right? And you, the person making the promise, would know that. Right? And so in this case, telling the lie wouldn't achieve the goal because nobody believes you. Right? In a world like that, nobody believes the lying promise. Lying promises can't produce the object or goal, which is to get access to the money. So you can't conceive of a world where everyone obeys this maxim. If everyone obeyed the maxim, no one could obey the maxim. Right? It creates a kind of paradox because in the situation where everybody does X in C, doing X in C doesn't lead to O. So we're in a situation where everyone lies in cases where someone needs their money protected in order to get access to that money. Then lying in that situation wouldn't lead to you getting the money. It's a failure of conception. You can't even conceive of a world where this works. Because what's going on when you tell lies is you're taking advantage of a general practice of telling the truth. And it's only with that background fact that most people tell the truth in these situations that you can get away with the lie. Right? The only way the lie makes sense, the only way the lie could do what you intend it to do is if everybody else, or not everybody else, but most other people are telling the truth. Because it's only in that case where anyone's going to believe you. Right? And so as a result, lying promises are always wrong. But it's not just lying promises. Lying promises are just a special case of a wider range of behaviors that all seem like they're going to fall afoul of this universalization test, and particularly to fall afoul of the failure in conception part. It's an example of free writing. What is free writing? The name comes from the practice of riding public transportation for free without paying. So the idea is, a bus stops, you get on the bus, you don't pay your bus fare. You make use of the good, in this case, public transportation, that is supported by most other people paying into the good. There are all sorts of things like this where you provide a good that you can't really restrict only to those people who support it. You have to make it available to sort of everyone if you're going to make it available to anyone. But if enough people free ride, it will destroy the system. Right? Because if you have, say, only 10% of the people riding the bus paying in to the public transportation system, then the public transportation system is carrying way, way, way more people than they can support with their money, right? Because the number of runs they're making means the buses break down sooner, which means they need to be repaired, they need to be fueled, but you're only getting enough money to support this for 10% of the overall ridership. So the idea is free riding, if only a few people do it, works, but if everybody does it, it destroys the good that the free riders are making use of. And that's sort of what's going on with a lying promise. A lying promise makes use of a good, the general acceptance of other people's word. That's the good that you're making use of, that you're sort of being a parasite on or free riding on when you lie. Right? Lying only really works because in general people don't do it. Right? You might think, oh, everybody lies, but think about the number of things you get told every day and think about how few of them are actually lies. Right? Society wouldn't work if people didn't generally tell the truth, because no one would trust each other if people didn't generally tell the truth, and if nobody ever trusted each other, most social relationships would just fall apart. So free riding in general seems like it's going to fall afoul of failures in conception. Anytime you are making use of the activities of others, you're being a parasite on their sort of good behavior, their behavior that supports the general norms that you are violating, then you're probably going to be falling afoul of the failure of conception route, because if everyone did what you did, nobody could do what you're doing. If everybody free rode, there wouldn't be any buses. If nobody paid their taxes, then nobody could get away. I mean, like, everybody would live in chaotic anarchy. And so you wouldn't get the benefit of not paying your taxes, which is, well, obviously there's still police and army and schools being provided, but I'm getting away with not paying my taxes. Anything like that is going to fall afoul of the failure of conception test. The other test is what we might call failure in will, and it's a lot more straightforward. Some things you can imagine everyone doing, but you just can't bring yourself to want them to do it. So think about the following thing. Think about a maxim that says you decide that every Friday you're going to just pick someone at random and treat them terribly. Why would you do this? I don't know. Maybe it releases stress for you. Maybe you get all wound up over the course of the week, and so on Friday you just want to unload on somebody. This apparently happens on Twitter. Right? It's the only way I can explain how awful people are on social media is, and not just on Fridays, but like people get like all pissed off about things over the course of the week, and so they decide they're just going to be horribly mean to someone online. But imagine if everyone actually did this. Imagine if everyone just picked someone at random to treat horribly in order to release stress. You can imagine such a world. I'm pretty sure such a world could exist where everyone did that. Everyone, and I'm talking like more extreme, like intentional abuse of someone. So like every Friday you decide, I'm just going to pour out like a chamber pot full of urine and feces on somebody's head who's walking by. Of course, that means you have to like collect the urine and feces. So this example's getting grosser than I meant it to, but whatever. Just like really awful stuff. You can imagine a world like that, right? Especially if everybody picked different days, so you never knew when it was coming. Right? But could you want to live in such a world? In such a world, you face very high odds at some point of being the victim of one of these things. It's conceivable, but you can't want it, right? Because here's what Kant thinks. Kant thinks everybody, no matter what, wants their own happiness. There's nothing we can do about that. Everybody wants their own happiness. He agrees with sort of descriptive egoism. Everybody has self-interested desires. He doesn't think we only ever do things that serve our own desires, but he thinks everyone has a desire to be happy. And so you can't bring yourself to will a world, to make real a world in which your own happiness would certainly suffer. And so if you're trying to imagine a situation where everybody follows this like bizarre rule that once a week I'm going to pick somebody and just like ruin their life. If you can't want to live in a world where everyone does that, then you shouldn't want to do it, or you shouldn't do it yourself. Now keep in mind, there's something that Kant is not doing here, that he's often confused, especially by people who are new to Kant, confused for doing. He is not saying that your acting on this maxim will lead to everyone doing what you do. He does not think that. He isn't saying that here's the reason you shouldn't tell a lying promise. It'll make more people tell lying promises. This is not what Kant thinks. He's saying that what makes it wrong for you to tell a lying promise is that the only way it works is if nobody else or most other people don't do it. What makes it wrong to just torment somebody at random is that you wouldn't want everyone else to do it. He is not making the false claim, the demonstrably false claim, that what you do causes other people to do it. Now, there are some things that's true for, right? There are some norms that maybe need to be policed really strictly because when other people see you do it, they're going to start doing it. But it's certainly not true all the time, right? It's not like every time someone lies to me, I start thinking, I should tell more lies. Right? If anything, it causes the opposite reaction. Like, I hate that person so much for lying to me that I don't want to be like them. So he is not saying that your actions have a sort of universal effect, because it's not about effects. Nothing about what Kant is saying is about is about considering the effect your actions have. What Kant is saying is just the fact that you don't want everyone else to do it, or that you can't even imagine everyone else doing it, makes it the case that you shouldn't do it. This is the first of Kant's moral laws, what he calls categorical imperatives, something I'll explain in a later video. All right, so I'm going to talk to you now about the big criticism, or one of the biggest criticisms of this law. And this law, by the way, is called, so this one here, I ought never to act in such a way that I couldn't also will that maxim on which I act should be a universal law. That is called and here, I'll write it over here because I'll eventually want a full list of them. This is called the formula of universal law. The reason it's called that is Kant is going to have several different moral rules he's going to tell you about. But he thinks they're all just different formulations of the same fundamental moral rule. He thinks there's only one moral rule. It's called the categorical imperative, but there are different ways of formulating it, different ways of expressing it. This is the formulation of universal law. It's a way of formulating the categorical imperative through the concept of universal law. Some of the others he's going to talk about are the formula of autonomy, the formula of humanity, the formula of the kingdom of ends. These are all just different ways of understanding the same basic moral principle, Kant thinks. All right, so what is this criticism of the formula of universal law? Well, it has to do with C in the maxim, right? Your circumstances, the circumstances in which you act. There are, at any given time, lots and lots of things true about the circumstances you're in. Suppose you're considering telling a lying promise, a clear case, a case that Kant uses himself of bad action. So let's say I'm thinking of telling a lying promise to my boss. My boss says, "Are you gonna get this work done by next Monday?" And I think to myself, "There's no way I'm getting it done by next Monday." But if I tell him I'm going to get it done by next Monday, and I actually get it done by Wednesday, he's probably not going to notice, and I'll get credit for getting it done on Monday, right? So I'm telling a lying promise, right? I'm considering telling a lying promise. So I will tell my boss I will get all the stuff done on Monday, or I'll tell a lying promise to my boss in circumstances where he's asking me about getting, my work done by Monday, but I can only get it done by Wednesday, to achieve the goal of not getting in trouble, but also not having to bust my ass to get the stuff done on time. All right. The characterization I gave of the circumstances was fairly precise, right? I could make the description of the circumstances less precise. I could say, I will tell a lying promise to my boss in situations where it will benefit me. Right? That's a very, very loose characterization. But I could also make the circumstances more detailed. Right? So I could say, I will tell a lying promise in circumstances where my boss has asked me to get something done by Monday, April 26th, 2020, while I was seated at my desk in my basement on the phone, right, while watching my cat eat cat food, right, in Frederick, Maryland, in the United States of America, blah, blah, blah. I could include so much detail into the circumstances, into my characterization of the circumstances, that it's impossible for anyone to ever be in the same circumstances. Right? So the more detail I build into the circumstances, the harder it is for other people to be in the same circumstances. The characterization I just gave, it would be impossible. Right? I'm the only person who's ever been in those circumstances because I made it about a particular place at a particular time when I knew I was alone. Right? If I do that, if I characterize the circumstances that way, it can make passing the universalization test trivially easy, because asking whether I could want everyone to do it would be the same thing as asking, could I want myself to do it? And so, some people have said Kant's test is worthless. Kant's test is worthless because there's ways you can sort of game the system. And I guess in a sense that it would be worthless if what Kant was trying to do was provide a moral rule that like a primitive computer could use. But he's not. He's providing a moral rule for actual people. And here's the thing about actual people. We have some sense of what facts are sort of salient or relevant in a situation and which aren't. So if I'm asking whether or not I should tell a lying promise, I know it's completely irrelevant that I'm telling a lying promise in my basement. That doesn't matter. I know that the fact that I'm telling the lying promise late at night on the 24th of April is completely irrelevant. I know, on the other hand, it is relevant that it's my boss. Potentially, anyway. That's the kind of thing that can make a difference, the relationship you have with the person. Kant's going to end up saying that doesn't make a difference, but later Kantians, people who follow Kant, have been uncomfortable with his universal disparagement of telling lies. And so as a result, they said, well, maybe it matters who you're lying to. We'll get to that criticism of Kant later. But being an adult who's lived in the world, who's thought about ethics from time to time, I know some things matter and some things don't. And I know that those details in my characterization of my circumstances that made it easy to pass the test were also details that aren't of any moral significance. So the idea is the only circumstances that you should include in your maxim are circumstances that might make a difference to the moral status of your action. What are those? Well, I don't know. Not in every case. I mean, I can't tell you ahead of time, which means I can't provide you with like an algorithm, which means that Kant's moral laws aren't supposed to even be an algorithm. Here we can see a similarity between Kant and Aristotle. Aristotle said, look, I can't provide you with a set of laws that like a really, really, really smart 7-year-old is going to be able to understand and live their life accordingly. A 7-year-old is exactly the kind of person who won't be able to tell necessarily which circumstances were relevant and which aren't. It takes maturity. It takes life experience. Right? And Kant is saying, and Kant shouldn't be read so as to say that you should be able to apply his laws without any experience whatsoever. All he wants to say, and this is something he gets to more in the second chapter, is that you can prove that the rule is true without appeal to experience, but it doesn't mean that when we're actually doing the application of the rule, we can't. So this is a criticism of Kant that many people have brought up, and I don't think it's an effective criticism, but it does point to the fact that Kant, like Aristotle, doesn't think that morality or moral theory is about providing an algorithm, right? It's not about providing a mechanical rule, right, that you can apply without any need for judgment, without any need for emotional maturity. And so that there is a fair bit of sort of intuition that gets involved, but for Kant, it's only in figuring out what circumstances are relevant to the situation and what aren't. All right, that's the end of Groundwork Chapter 1. The next video will be on Groundwork Chapter 2.